Hello, I will be talking about scientific writing, and this is part one of the presentation where I'll focus on writing manuscripts or scientific papers. I'm Raj Moray, and I'm a professor at Duke University, the School of Medicine. Let's get started. In the overview of my talk is to describe writing manuscripts and how that's the currency for scientists. Talk a little bit about scientific papers and the publication process and how they're a metric for scientific productivity, and then actually go into the writing process of writing manuscripts. In this part, focusing on papers, and then talk a little bit about the consumers of scientific knowledge and dissemination of scientific knowledge. So just like we have a monetary currency, publications are essentially the currency of scientists. They are where we publish the discoveries in scientific journals, and they are reviewed by funding agencies who will fund scientific experiments and studies with grants. Other scientific currency is delivering lectures, both to other scientists as well as the general public, and training and mentoring students of science. There are several types of scientific papers. The most important is the original scientific article, which is derived from data that's collected by the scientists or observations made by the scientists. The data is analyzed to make some sort of conclusion and forms the empirical evidence of science, which is to say that it forms the basis of the scientific method, where we collect and analyze data and make conclusions. There's also quantitative reviews or meta-analyses where elaborate and fairly sophisticated and statistical models are used to aggregate the results from many different experiments that are designed to answer the same or similar questions. There's qualitative reviews that are conceptually similar, but don't use any sort of rigorous statistics, but simply recount the previously published papers. There's editorials, which are short opinion pieces on a particular topic. There's commentaries or perspectives, which are more in-depth articles that often take a long view of a scientific discovery in a certain field. And then case reports, which may describe a single observation or a small handful up to 5. So those are the scientific types of papers, and I'll focus on the first one, which is the original scientific paper. So writing papers has undergone an evolution in science, and the current format is what I'll describe, generally accepted format that's started sort of in the early to mid 20th century. So the title of the title of the manuscript, very, very important. That's what people see first, and that's how they decide whether they're going to read your article. Then you have the names of the authors who wrote it and who worked on the project and the institutions where they belong and worked. Usually there's a summary, which is called an abstract. It's about 250 words, give or take. And then the main part of the manuscript is described with this acronym IMRAD, which stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. So the introduction is intended to explain why your research is important, how your research will build on the earlier discoveries in the field, what is the goal of your research, and what is the research question you are going to ask and hopefully answer, and how will your results advance the field. Anatomy or methods is well, it describes your experiment in enough detail that other scientists can recreate your experiment. So this is the methods section. It describes your sample. That could be humans, mice, monkeys. It could be yeast or cells or proteins or genes. It describes the manipulation, what variable or condition you're manipulating or what you're observing. And basically explains how you did what you did, and how you did it. And then one of the most important parts of this section is to describe the statistical methods. That's what variables were measured and how they were measured and how they were analyzed. And also to report all the technical parameters of how you made measurements, and to report the equipment and the settings that were used in that instrumentation. Next was the results. This is where you report your scientific findings, and that means reporting the data, and then how you, and also the process of how you go from the data to the finding, or data to the discovery. That's the process of inference. That's at the core of science. And so you will provide statistical outputs to quantify your results, which you'll report the significance. That's from a statistical point of view, significance, which just means how likely is it that your results are for real. Then is the effect size, which is what is the magnitude of this effect, or this this result. How large is it? How big is it? And then the test statistic. And you'll also use tables when you have lots of information to convey in a concise and compact way, and also use visuals or graphics or animation or any type of method to condense and effectively convey the results of your study. This is a very classic textbook example. The gentleman in the bottom right is John Snow, the father of public health. He described, using this very elegant graphic here, of the different places in London. This is in the 1850s during the cholera outbreak, and he mapped the number of people affected by cholera at each location. And from that, he inferred that cholera was spreading through well water, where residents were getting their drinking water. And in fact, well water was being contaminated by groundwater seepage, contaminated groundwater, which led to the cholera epidemic. And his findings actually led to resolution of the cholera epidemic. So finally, the last section is the discussion, and is to summarize your main findings in a narrative form, without the data and the statistics and so forth. That's how you begin your discussion. Then you interpret your results, and how did your data become knowledge? What is the knowledge? How does that knowledge contribute to the current state of science? What can be learned from your findings? In other words, how can it enable further discovery? How can it advance the field? And how successful were you in your achieving the goals that you laid out? And then, like every research, a project or a study, what were the limitations? How far can you go with using your findings to explain the research question, or are there limitations to that? And finally, the conclusions that you can draw. The publication process is sometimes a very mysterious and opaque process, and it's actually, I'll lay it out here, begins with formatting your manuscript. Once you've written it, formatting your manuscript for the journal you've selected. Then uploading your manuscript to the web portal for the journal. That initiates a peer review process, which starts with a journal editor that assigns your paper to experts in the field. These experts then read your paper and provide a critical review with comments, which they send back to the editor. And they also send a recommendation of what should be done with your paper. And the editor will then use that feedback from usually 3 expert reviewers, could be more, to either accept your paper, ask you to revise your paper, or reject your paper. And if you revise it, you'll address all the critiques and recommendations. And then if it's accepted, it'll be published online and then printed, although the printing part is usually is now becoming a thing of the past. Scientific publications are measured through and actually journals are measured through a scoring system called impact factor. Pretty much all scientific journals have an impact factor. I've listed some with a very high impact factor, like New England Journal of Medicine, which means that their discoveries have advanced science, but there's a formula to calculate them. There's other really impactful journals, Science and Nature, and on the other end of the spectrum is a journal like the Journal of Social Psychology. It reflects how influential the journal is based on the discoveries and also the citation count, which is how many times articles in that journal have been referenced or cited, I should say, in future work, in work that's published since the time your paper was published. And there's also another metric called H-index that lists your publications from the most cited to the least cited. And it basically calculates or records the ordinal number in your publication list that equals the number of citations it's received. So just as an example, this is a list of publications, and you can rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are the ordinal numbers, and then you can list the number of times it's been cited. And if you go down, if say, for example, this is the 200th publication, and this one here, and it's been cited 200 times, then your H-index is 200. It could be that your 10th most cited paper is cited 10 times. Your H-index would be 10. So let's turn to the importance of writing skills. This is really at the core of this presentation. And it's because other researchers should be able to follow your work and potentially to replicate your methods and hopefully also replicate your results. If your science matters, others should know about it, both the general public as well as the scientific community. Getting the scientific community excited about your work increases its relevance. It broadens its application. It means that other scientists are more likely to build on that. And the quality of your writing matters in getting your scientific discoveries published, because the more effectively you can communicate your ideas, the more attention it's going to garner. And you're also going to be able to compete more successfully for funding of future research, which is going to, be important for your efforts in science. And since science is getting more specialized and technical, it requires greater skill to communicate this kind of information. And regardless of how great your discovery is, if you don't publish it and nobody knows about it, then it's not a thing. So, you know, it's not complete until it's published. I'll go, here's some very, I think, important, effective writing habits. It's, keep in mind, good writers work at it. They're not people who are necessarily just naturally good at writing. It's a lot like playing a sport or a musical instrument. It has to be part of your daily routine. You need to write and then revise and write and revise and write and revise and make it better each time. You get feedback from people. You can join a writing group. You can get, you can also critique other people's writing. I have this nice montage of famous African-American writers, starting with Phyllis Wheatley, Toni Morrison, Frederick Douglass, James Baldwin, and let you guys identify the other ones. Effective writing. So start, brainstorming and making an outline. This outline can develop into your manuscript as you flesh out each bullet point into a paragraph. It's important to allow your writing to rest, put it on the written material on the shelf, and then come back to it. You can also work with writing multiple cold drafts. That means you write a draft, then put it aside and write another draft right from scratch. Let your peers read your drafts and give you feedback. For large projects, of course, divide your writing project into smaller sections. Use grammar checkers and spell checkers, and avoid vernacular or spoken style in scientific writing. Never, ever self-censor when you write. This is a cardinal rule that I like to emphasize. So just write it down, don't self-censor, and then revise it, and then write some more and revise it, and then it'll get better at each revision. So learn to let go, don't strive for perfection. Also, don't wait till you're inspired. You don't need to be inspired. You just need to start writing down facts. And you can do this, but remember to do this when you're alert and energetic, and reserve time that's protected place and time for writing. So, number one, never self-censor. Read to write. Reading to write is, we all have been, we all read to learn and for enjoyment and entertainment, but not necessarily or for learning how to write. So my advice is, when you read in such a way that you're learning writing. You want to identify bad writing so you can avoid the same mistakes. You can read good writing and then know what to emulate, and how you use words effectively to build sentences, and how sentences are constructed to make impactful statements, and how paragraphs are written and constructed to communicate cogent ideas, and then the paragraphs, how are they combined to create a story. Also, learn to diversify your writing style and your repertoire, so that you're more versatile and you can be more effective. So, if you have questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is right there, rajendra.more@duke.edu. And thank you for listening. Thank you for your interest, and do not hesitate to contact me for questions.